Okay, let's start off with SkillUp's article over here. Okay, so on his channel, on his Patreon channel for SkillUp, you can get it. It's free. You can go to this and listen to, and listen to what he's it's free. You can join his Patreon, but he also has stuff on the Patreon for free. This is from 3 days ago. Okay. It says, do game developers still want to publish on Xbox? He says, once upon a time, Xbox consoles were leading into the charge, and they had first-party games. They also cultured event in themselves. The online multiplayer community was unparalleled, and the Xbox Live Arcade pioneered digital distribution, giving platform to groundbreaking titles from small independent studios. That's not quite the case anymore. Okay? Existing exclusive games are few and far between. Other platforms have caught up to the online front, and the Xbox console still sees dozens of new independent game publishers next week. The ID, or ID, Xbox Independent Developer Program, is no longer seems to be the must destination for developers it once was. From the outside, bits and pieces of the news have raised questions like a planned multi-platform release dropping Xbox support, a tandem with Xbox declining console hardware sales, and what Microsoft's new focus is on both Xbox console and Windows PC, which now expands into beginnings of multi-platform publishing strategy. Okay? It says Xbox direction is undergoing a clear change, and as much as the company tries to divert our attention to new controller skins or odd marketing partnerships, it's difficult to ignore that the feeling of the console's X factor, at which might push some to jump into the ecosystem, no longer exists. That much feels obvious from the outside, aside from the value proposition from Xbox Game Pass. What advantages do you get for owning an Xbox console over the rival platform? What advantages do you get from owning an Xbox console if you have Windows PC? And if you're a game developer, why would you work to bring your game to Xbox, especially if you already have a PC release? It says, we're curious to see whether or not these are the same quandaries existed on the other side of the coin, leading to our survey a dozen game developers to get their perspective on the current state of Xbox and how viable they saw it was potential platform that they work to live. Okay? It says, we spoke to individual game makers from around the world, and all of whom are the publisher games and Xbox consoles in recent years, and they had new titles in development. They ranged from solo developers to mid-sized independent studios, though all requested an autonomy in order to speak more freely on the subject. And this is a running thing, right? Because obviously they don't want to. This is why we can't ever get developers talking about anything that have worked in the industry until they leave the industry. Because a lot of people that work in the industry, they don't want to say anything because obviously they'll get blackballed. Right? It'll be harder for them to work in the industry if they come out and speak about what's happening in the industry, right? So they all want to be anonymous, which is fine. Okay. It says the news of Microsoft closures of Arcane Studios, Tango Gameworks, and Alpha Dog Studios. The overall takeaway was this. Though the perceived value of porting games to Xbox consoles differs, depending on the size of the studio and type of games the developer was making, one thing was clear. Developers are seeing very few people buy their games on Xbox consoles, that largely blamed because of the behavioral shift that Xbox Game Pass has caused. And it's created a vicious cycle. This goes across the board, right? We can see what's happening right now, almost in real time, with Square Enix, with Final Fantasy, right? Final Fantasy came out, and it was timed exclusive, before it came out to PC and whatnot, to PlayStation. PlayStation people are also not buying games, right? So it's a culture thing. I don't think it's an Xbox thing. I think it's a culture thing that's happening now where less people want to buy games or own games because they know that they can just wait a couple of weeks, a couple of months, it'll go on sale, or it'll be on some streaming service at some point, if it's PlayStation Plus, if it's on PC, if it's a discounted price. And smart consumers, right? Because you don't want to pay full price for a lot of these things, but at the same time, it's doing the exact same thing that happens to the movie theaters. Movies come out, you're like, I'm not going to go to the theater. It's too expensive. I'll just wait 17 days or 30 days. It'll be on a streaming service, right? So that's what's happening right now. It says, our Xbox sales have been the weakest without a doubt, said the developer, as much as celebrated award-winning title, which is also ported to Xbox more than 2 years ago. After the initial releasing on other platforms, with the exception of Game Pass revenue, the games have sold less than 5% compared to other titles. Which makes sense, right? Why would you pay for something if you can get it on Game Pass? That's just that's smart business sense, right? I shouldn't say business sense. That's smart consumer. Okay, you're like, why would I spend $70 when I can just pay $10 or $12 or $15 and try it out? How many of us have already talked about the Star Wars Outlaw game? Why would I spend $70 or $130 when I can just spend $18 on Ubisoft Plus? Okay. Same thing now with Assassin's Creed Shadows, I believe. Okay. It says it was a universal experience with all the developers we spoke to sharing similar breakdowns of alluding to the similar statistics. Okay. Xbox sales always came in last, and overwhelming front runners of sales in cases were PC and Nintendo Switch. Okay. So there you go. It takes exactly my point. People are not buying games on Xbox and people are not buying games on PlayStation. But yet PC and Nintendo Switch, Nintendo blows the doors off of any other company. Okay. All their first-party titles that are exclusive to Nintendo, they sell 25, 30, 40, 50, 60 million copies for their first-party titles. It's not just like one game here or there. Like, the lowest Nintendo game sales at 30 million copies for their first-party title is like their worst game that they're selling, right? Meanwhile, Mario Kart's sold 64, 65 million copies for that. It says, quote, "You just aren't going to sell the same units as you would elsewhere," said one developer, who led a studio responsible for multiple titles that also achieved commercial and critical success. He says, quote, "It's a bit like trying to sell a DVD to someone that uses Netflix. Sure, people still do it from time to time, but you're going to target the right audience." And this is what we're saying when Starfield came out. Me and Sarge are like, why would people buy Starfield when you can play Starfield for $10 or $12? Okay. It says the next natural question is, if Xbox console sales almost always track last for developers we spoke to, was it even worth the time, money, and effort to bring them over? He says the response varied, depending on the type of games developers were working on. For small teams working on less technical demanding games, relatively speaking, porting wasn't typically a big blocker. He says, quote, "The difficulty of making games for Xbox is low on the list of reasons why anyone should consider the platform." He said reason one developer who had shipped both 2D and 3D titles, especially in the world where Switch and Steam Deck is going to be your optimized target. For others, seamlessly, those behind games with more complex 3D designs, multiplayer components, and also online infrastructure, the issue was far bigger. Quote, "If you need to spend US $20,000 out of pocket to port it to get to a platform, you have to hope to make more than that to just break even, if that's not even factoring in time." Another developer framed the task as port this way. When we shipped on Xbox, there were 5 different hardware profiles to consider for Xbox One, Xbox One X, Xbox One Series X, Xbox Series S, and Windows PC. I don't think it's healthy for small indie game developers to do a juggling act for porting to 5 different platforms when doing multi-platform porting if something at AAA studio will invest millions of dollars into doing. You must really consider what you're doing a job in which usually has an entire division allocated to it, right? So again, for smaller companies, it's not feasible to go to 5 different platforms, let alone then do the Switch, then do the PlayStation, then do the PC, right? There's a lot of stuff in there. It says, as we know, even as well-resourced studios, it kind of worked and can be taxing. The Xbox Series S is commonly believed to be a pain point when it comes to porting a game to Xbox platform. Requiring significant tinkering to run smoothly on a less powerful console, even Larian Studios was delayed in getting Baldur's Gate 3 to Xbox release out the door, seemingly because of this issue. Now, something that's surprising in the discussion concerning efforts versus value, however, was that some developers flagged the same concerns with PlayStation. After all, though it's constantly ranked above Xbox in finding sales and players for games, it still trails significantly behind PC and Switch. So here you go. If you are an Xbox fanboy and you're a PlayStation fanboy, see, these developers look at you the exact same. It's not selling well on these two consoles. It sells very well on Switch, and it sells very well on PC. Okay? It says it makes a little sense these days to ship on all platforms, said one developer. It's better to just move to them afterwards when you get some incentive to do so. Those incentives are key. A few of the developers we spoke to said that in the past they had been recipients of funds specifically allocated to assist in porting projects, but programs like this had all but dried up. Now all eyes were squarely focused on Xbox Game Pass deals, which were also not as lucrative as they were just a few years ago, but still enough to consider putting the work in for it. Now, we had an article we talked about 7-8 months ago that we talked about on this channel about independent developers, the people that were publishing Tunic, okay? They said it was very lucrative for them early on in the Game Pass cycle, okay? As time passes, more developers are going out there. It's going to be harder and harder for independent developers to get their games seen, because if you've ever had this experience where you go to like Netflix or any kind of other streaming service and you're trying to find a movie to watch, or you're trying to find a game to play on Game Pass or PlayStation Plus, there's just rows and rows and rows, and you get lost into this thing. You're just like, I just want to watch something. I just want to play something. They said early on, Tunic was very successful. One, because I think they made a game, sold a game, and it was low production because it's one guy that created it, but it was very lucrative for them to make that. Same with like Cuphead and stuff like that. But now as 100 more games come out or thousands of more games come out and they all try to get on Game Pass, you got to try to sift through what's good and what's bad, right? It says one developer who had received funding numerous times from Microsoft through Game Pass and games with gold deals said, it's not integral to this decision, but it's a massive help. It means that we can get less stress over whether or not we make money, our money back, because they're also giving these guys the money up front, right? We saw the FTC documents talking about how they were going to pay Baldur's Gate 3 like $50 million. They were going to pay like Rocksteady for Suicide Squad $250 million, right? So you saw a lot of these things where they were going to give money up front to them, which at that point, they made their money off of Xbox. They don't care what they sell then because they made a majority of their money back. Now the rest of the platforms, PC, Switch, PlayStation, they're going to make the remainder of the money on that. But that's a big, huge chunk of stress off their shoulders, right? Another developer had also benefited from multiple Game Pass deals, echoed the sentiment. As an indie, you have to weigh up every tiny expenditure against the potential impact of your vision. But knowing your minimum gains a year from the launch of advanced makes that's a lot less stressful, which I just said, right? Get that money up front. It's less stressful for them, where they can make up the rest of the money through the other platforms. It says a mid-sized developer was eager to cause other developers. However, if you don't have a big game and they know how much money you currently earn on the platform, they can really give you a lowball offer saying, well, it's 18 to 24 months of your current revenue up front, okay? But beyond development funding and financial compensation, the common sentiment as is simply having your game as part of Xbox Game Pass subscription service was the best incentive to bring your game to Xbox at all because the better potential audience. So it's a big, huge deal for them to get that game to seen by most people for like those microtransactions a lot of these companies have. If it's a season pass, battle pass, just one skin to put in as an extra thing, a bonus or something like that, right? It says Xbox platform, which we won't say no to if the price is right, but there's also expectations that will only consider this platform if Game Pass is on the table, said another. If you ship Xbox without Game Pass, you miss out on a majority of the player base who are only playing Game Pass from playing your game, said one solo developer. I think it like the when multiplayer games get DLC maps and split the user base, right? You got to think about this as well, right? There's how many people that are having an Xbox that's out in the market right now, right? I think there's like, what, 26 million, right? 26 million Xboxes out there. Well, there's 35 million or 34 million, at least the last time we checked, Game Pass. That means basically everyone that owns an Xbox potentially has Game Pass. Obviously not, because some might not have it, and then people that have no Xbox have Game Pass. So obviously, if you're making a game and it's not on Game Pass, you're not hitting all the potential buyers, or I should say, gamers out there, because not everyone's buying. Like for instance, Minecraft Dungeon. I don't own Minecraft Dungeon, but I own all the DLC for Minecraft Dungeon. Right? I never bought Minecraft Dungeons, but yet I own all the DLC for Minecraft Dungeon at $5 a pop. Okay. So there's also therein lies one of the biggest effects of Xbox's big subscription service push, creating the averse to actually buying games on Xbox, which leads to less return for developers, which discourages them from being on the platform. Some developers also point out that the deals regarding the PlayStation Plus catalog for free essential games having a similar effect. If you can't get one of these deals and you don't have the resources for your team to scale to do all the platforms, I can understand prioritizing other platforms, said mid-sized developer. That's what I would do. He says, quote, I feel like consoles in general are just becoming less relevant to indies, said one studio. If you have a mega hit, then no matter what you do, you're set. But if you're very worried about being able to recoup the $50,000 on a console with small title, especially with porting costs. He says, today is all about the Steam and Nintendo Switch. They're all despite a common sentiment, and when you actually came to administrative side of publishing games, Xbox was by far the easiest platform to deal with, thanks to the independent Xbox program. He says, historically, I've said Microsoft were more difficult to work with for publishing with a rough start to self-publishing in the Xbox One era. But they've made a huge improvements over the last decade, said one developer. Generally, I think there's pretty healthy place now, and there's tools in the process of requests, said another. But short of uprooting Xbox Game Pass, how can the platform improve for developers who don't have the advantage for AAA publishers behind them? Proposed solutions were varied, but it also came down to one thing. Better discoverability, incentives for people to play outside of Game Pass. And again, that's a big thing. How do you get yourself seen when you have to try to scroll through all the AAA, now quadruple A games that will be out in the future, AAA games, AA games, and then these independent games are there. You see the big games that they paid hundreds of $millions for on the front page. You're not really seeing those independent games unless you go look for them, and that's what you like to play, okay? So it's a lot harder unless you have those breakout games like Cuphead or Tunic or Hades, stuff like that, right? So even without Game Pass, they're still talking about reaching millions of players who've already invested into game devices and are actively looking for games to play. Reason one developer, I feel discovery and methods of reaching your audience feel stronger on Switch and Steam as they do focus points on their themed events. That's exactly what I was just saying, right? So this developer pointed out the experience of stumbling across the game on Steam you may have never heard of and discovering the hundreds of thousands of players in reviews. These are games that have never had a platform to deal with Valve, and they just found their audience anyway. It feels like that doesn't really happen much on Xbox, and I think it would benefit the platform if they think this is about why that is. So they talked about this. Xbox said they're putting more into the id Xbox type stuff. I think there's a whole section for independent games that they're going to be doing. I think they're going to implement that later this year, if I'm not mistaken. I thought we read an article about it 2 months ago. He says another developer reminisces about the days of Xbox 360 and the conditions of the frosted indie boom in the mid-2000s. He says, I really miss these days. Xbox Live Arcade, where there are also 5 game showcase, and if you bought 4 of them, you get the 5th free. They really made it like there was an event. In the grand scheme of things, however, for some of these small to mid-sized developers, many of whom are achieved consistent success to date, they declined viability in publishing games on Xbox and PlayStation were just a small part of the greater problems looming in the gaming making and publishing space. The bigger issue is that everyone is playing the evergreen games like Call of Duty, Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, etc. Each one is soaking up a small percentage of players who never venture further out, said one developer. We've talked about this as well. We only have 24 hours in the day, right? If you're playing Destiny, right, you're locked focus in on Destiny. If you're playing World of Warcraft, you're locked in on World of Warcraft, right? There's these games that happen that people keep playing, and this is why they're going for that evergreen. This is why companies are going for live service games. This is why Rocksteady made Suicide Squad. This is why Crystal Dynamics made Marvel's Avengers, because they're trying to make you focus in, because if you're playing that game, then there's a potential. Not only did you give them the $60, $70, $100, $125 to buy the game early access or whatnot, but there's that small percentage that you might buy a $5 skin. There's that small percentage that you might buy the season pass. And this is what all these companies are looking for, okay? So how does an independent company compete with that? They can't, okay? This is what that stat about a month and a half ago, where they found out that, 60%, or no, I'm sorry, it was more than that, right? Was it 70% were people playing just 6 games? 6 games, which is exactly what they just said. Minecraft, Roblox, Call of Duty, Fortnite, and everybody else is paying 7-year-old games, okay? Or more, which is crazy. So others were more hopeful and optimistic, said another. As long as there's players to reach and deals to offer benefits, I try not to worry about it too much, but that's what's looming over the horizon. And ultimately, exemplified by some of the 2024's biggest hits that seamlessly came from nowhere, it's often those untroubled and unaffected attitudes that foster in some great ideas for unique games that also keep the medium so exciting. Even when you think it can't get any better, maybe even able to play some of these games on console one day, maybe. So, words by Edmund Tran, quotes have been lightly edited and clarified perspective autonomy. So there you go. So this is the deal that's happening. So it's not just a Microsoft thing and Game Pass thing, right? Developers, at least from this article, they're looking more towards PC and they're looking more towards the Switch because that's the indie development team. Now, obviously, if you go to AAA and stuff like that, it's a completely different thing. But from this article, from these developers that were talking, they're all kind of scared about what it is, and they need to get those deals from PlayStation to put on PlayStation Plus, or they need those deals for Game Pass, right? And again, if there's 30 million people out there with an Xbox and 25 million of them have Game Pass, you would be dumb not to put your game on Game Pass, right? So they try to get those deals, and if they can't get those deals, then it's kind of like a moot point. Why am I going to put it on Xbox anyway? If they don't give us a deal, then I'm not going to do it. But these are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments section down below. Please make sure you share, like, and subscribe. What do you think about this? Do you think this is a massive problem in the indie space in the games going forward? What do you think could be done? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you like what I do here, please make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe. And if you'd like to go above and beyond that, become a member as little as $5. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys on the next one.